1 year before the attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who was the first member of Able Danger to go public, has now been told in writing by the Defense Intelligence Agency that he can't speak to members of Congress or their staff without prior approval. And now a security clearance, which allowed him to deal with classified information, has been pulled. The congressman says Schaefer has been gagged, punished for speaking up.
It's obvious to me this is a clear attempt to silence this guy, but now even more than to silence him, to ruin him as a person and a military officer. I've talked to all the Able Danger players, and they all agree this is a witch hunt against Tony. It's wrong, it's un-American, it's unacceptable.
In a recent letter to Secretary Rumsfeld, the congressman writes, "You know as well as I that inside the Beltway, there is a time-honored tradition of smearing the accuser rather than answering the charge. That method is now apparently being employed in your department, and while it may be a familiar way of doing business in Washington, it is no less disappointing." The congressman wants the Defense Department's internal watchdog, the Inspector General, to investigate whether Schaefer has been targeted for speaking out, and Weldon says the head of the House Armed Services Committee is backing the request. According to several published reports, the Defense Intelligence Agency has had no comment on the congressman's allegations.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to offer my comments surrounding the use of security clearance system as a method of intimidation and retaliation, and in my case, DI removal of my security clearance based on my protected disclosures of information to the 9/11 Commission and to Congress regarding Operation Able Danger. Many of us take seriously our oath of office to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We demonstrate our commitment by decades of service to this country, trying to conduct operations to ensure our citizens are protected. There are officers within the bureaucracy who abandon their oath of office and instead become focused on a strategy of self-preservation, of obstruction of accountability. A culture now exists in which leaders with this abhorrent set of values are in charge of large portions of the intelligence community.
The staffer on the 9/11 Commission for Jamie Gorelick was Dieter Snell. Dieter Snell was the one who interviewed Scott Philpott in July of '04. It was Dieter Snell, an Annapolis graduate, and a man who will take over the command of one of our destroyers in January. His credibility has never been challenged by anyone in the Pentagon. It was Scott Philpott who was debriefed by Dieter Snell, who buried the story and did not allow the 9/11 commissioners to receive the facts of Able Danger. In fact, in talking to Scott Philpott, he gave me a direct quote from Dieter Snell. Now remember, the Congress, in a bipartisan vote, established the commission to get the facts about 9/11. And the facts obviously involved Al-Qaeda and obviously involved Muhammad Atta. In July of '04, a Navy officer, Annapolis grad, voluntarily goes in to debrief the 9/11 Commission staff, and he mentions that he will swear on his entire life career that he identified Muhammad Atta in January of 2000, and that his team had a chart with Muhammad Atta's name on it and face on it, but also that he saw that chart over and over again. It wasn't a one-time glance. And he also told Dieter Snell that they tried to transfer that information to the FBI. This was Dieter Snell's response, quote, "What do you want us to do with this information? We go to print in 10 days, end quote.
And one other interesting note, Tom, we've also learned at NBC that there was a President Bush in the White House during the morning of these events. His father, former President Bush, was actually at the White House the morning of the attack.
The bin Laden family are in the Carlyle Group and were meeting on the morning of 9/11 discussing the coming year's financial ventures. Bush Sr., another chairman at Carlyle, was meeting with bin Laden's father and brother, where both of them were to be intimately affected by the day's outcome on completely opposite sides of the spectrum. Carlyle is a defense contracting firm, so they both conveniently would be profiting from the war resulting in the attacks that they were witnessing take place on television. While Americans couldn't fly, the bin Ladens were flown out of the country.
One more story. Yesterday, in the first couple of hours of this, when all American, all U.S. air carriers were ordered to land at the nearest airport, this was taken very seriously. One of our photographers noticed a military jet trailing closely a civilian airliner in the vicinity of Washington, D.C. He was in Arlington at the time. By the time he swung his camera up, it was out of frame, so we have only 2 or 3 seconds of video of it. But this was taken very seriously yesterday.
To ensure safe passage back to Saudi Arabia, the bin Ladens were flown out of the country with military escorts for protection without answering any questions by investigators. Protected on their aerial evasion from U.S. authorities by U.S. military, while all planes were grounded in the United States, to which even high-ranking U.S. officials could not travel, the bin Ladens were allowed to fly.
How did Osama bin Laden's family flee America? Let's go to CNN's Brian Todd. Brian?
Wolf, in those frightful days after 9/11, U.S. intelligence dealt with a fog of information, and these newly released documents seem to add to the confusion. More than a week after the attacks, a couple of days after more than 100 Saudi nationals, including members of Osama bin Laden's family, are flown out of the U.S. on chartered flights, an FBI document mentions one of the flights. Quote, the plane was chartered either by the Saudi Arabian royal family or Osama bin Laden. The plane in question left on September 19th. The FBI document was written on September 21st. Was the FBI still not sure if bin Laden was involved in arranging a flight carrying his family members even after it had left?
You may recall that the bin Laden family, some of them were here in the Orlando area, and now more on how they got out of the country. Bob.
That's right, Claire. We've already taken a look at some parts of this report, and on pages 329 and 330, they deal directly with the issue of whether the members of the bin Laden family were given preferential treatment to flee Orlando and other cities without the proper scrutiny. Let's show you some video that was taken exclusively by News Channel 2 8 days after 9/11. That man there is Osama bin Laden's younger brother Khalil, who had been here vacationing with other family members there on an estate that they owned in West Orange County. Now,
but I feel, frankly, abandoned. If I question anything about the official story, I'm called a conspiracy theorist. When the first news reporter from my local area in upstate New York came to tell me she was going to allow me to tell a beautiful story of my daughter, all I asked that day was, why could I not fly home from Toronto? But Osama bin Laden's family and some Saudi nationals whose names I still don't know were flown out of the country in our airspace. I was grounded. They were not.
According to the former chief consular officer in Saudi Arabia who blew the whistle on the joint CIA-Al-Qaeda visa fraud scandal that took place while he was there, J. Michael Springman worked for the United States government for 20 years with the Foreign Service and Consulate. He claimed that the CIA was overriding visa decisions made in Saudi Arabia and protecting Al-Qaeda operatives in getting them to the United States to be trained and have returned for covert programs in the Middle East.
I began with the federal government in 1969, taking a job in the Bureau of International Commerce at the U.S. Department of Commerce. While I was there, I had been working my way through the International Trade Administration, doing some trade show promotions, and got myself assigned to Stuttgart as a commercial officer in the State Department's State Commerce Exchange Program. Went on to India as the first foreign commercial service officer, and then got into the real State Department, and as a reward got sent to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.